Namaste everyone, welcome back to CodeCraft with Poonam. I am your coding mentor Poonam Agrawal. Welcome to a brand new series that is our Hibernate and JPA with Poonam Agrawal. So, if you have been following my Spring Boot series, you have been using JPA repository and saving data with just one line of code, right? But did you ever wonder what is actually happening underneath? So how does a Java object like recipe? So as we are taking an example of recipe, right? So if you have been following my all the series, then you know that I'm explaining with an example recipe for your better understanding. Okay, so how does a Java object like recipe magically become a row in a database table? And how does Spring know which column maps to which field? That is exactly what this series answers. Okay, so by the end of the series, you will understand how Java objects map to database tables, how Hibernate does the heavy lifting, what JPA actually is, why this knowledge makes you a much stronger Spring Boot developer. Okay, so for your better understanding, imagine you are running a recipe. Okay, recipe book. Okay, so you write your recipes on some cards. So let's say index cards. Okay, so this index cards is nothing but your Java objects here. Okay, and your database is a giant filing cabinet. So here it is nothing but your database. Okay, so now here is the problem. What? So for example, index cards are written in English. Okay, so here that English is nothing but here your Java objects. Okay, and the filing cabinet only understands a special filing language that is SQL. Okay, so here you need a translator who can take your English index card and file it correctly. So find a card in the cabinet and hand it back to you in English. And update a card without you having to learn the filing language yourself. Okay, so here that translator is nothing but your Hibernate. So here you have some rule book. Okay, so the rule book that all translators must follow is called your JPA. Okay, and Hibernate is just one translator who follows that rulebook. Got it? So now the problem without ORM. So here ORM is nothing but object relational mapping. Okay. So what is the problem without ORM? So without a tool like Hibernate, how saving one recipe looks like in Java. Let's see that. Okay. So here you see that without ORM, you need to have a connection. Okay, that is driver manager dot get connection. Here you will be giving this. Okay, and then you have to give up repeat statements. Okay, that is insert into recipe. Okay, what are the fields you are providing? All that things and its values, right? And then you have to set the string that is one comma recipe dot get name. Okay, and then you have to set another that is category, right? Here we are providing name, category, cook time, minutes, right? All these things you need to set as well, right? Say this, and then after that you need to provide the statement dot execute update. Okay, and then you need to close the statements, and then you need to close the connection as well. Okay, so here you need to write these number lines of code just to save one object, and this gets much worse for updates, deletes and complex queries. Okay, so that's the problem with plain JDBC. So here you have lots of boilerplate code. SQL strings are error prone and hard to maintain. Switching database means rewriting all your SQLs. So here no automatic mapping between objects and tables is present, right? That's why ORM comes into picture. So what is ORM? ORM is nothing but it is an object relational mapping. It is a technique that maps automatically your Java world and your database world. Okay, so now coming to which database interaction approach should you use for your Java application? Plain JDBC or Hibernate ORM? So here you can see that code verbosity. That means in plain JDBC, it requires significant manual boilerplate code. Okay, you need to write lines of code for a single save operation, as I told you, right? And if you go with this Hibernate ORM, it minimizes the repetitive code structure. It abstracts persistence logic into a framework methods. Okay, and coming to maintenance and safety. So here plain JDBC is prone to manual errors. Here SQL strings are hard to maintain and debug. And when it comes to Hibernate ORM, then it enhances the code reliability. Okay. So here it automatic mapping. So here automatic mapping happens between the objects and database tables. And then coming to database portability, if you go with plain JDBC, then it is tied to a specific SQL dialects. Okay, so what happens due to that? Switching between databases requires rewriting all your SQL queries. And if you go with this Hibernate ORM, then it provides database independence. Why? Because it abstracts underlying database differences. I hope you got it now. So instead of writing SQL, you work with plain Java objects. The ORM tool translates your Java operations into SQL automatically. Got it? So now coming to object relational mapping. So here you can see how it works, this ORM. It is a bridge between your class and the table, database table. Okay, so class is nothing but it represents a blueprint for creating objects in Java. Okay, whereas table, what is table? Table is a collection of related data held in rows and columns in a database. Okay, and then objects. Here it acts as a bridge between the object and your row. So here object is nothing but your instance, right? It is a specific instance of a class holding data. This is your Java world. This is your database world. Okay. So here what is a row? Row is nothing but a single record within a database table. Okay. And then here this ORM is a bridge for field and column. Okay, so here field is nothing but a variable within a class, Java class that holds data. Okay, and from field to it converts to column. That is here column is nothing but it is a vertical set of data values of a particular type in a database table. And then coming to data type, whatever here string, int, etc. So here this data type specifies the type of data a variable can hold in Java. So this ORM converts this data type to SQL type. So in SQL we have varchar, int, etc. Okay, so here what is this SQL type? It is nothing but it specifies the type of data a column can hold in SQL. Okay, so here this ORM is a technique that maps automatically. Okay, now coming to JPA specification for Java ORM tools. So first of all, what is JPA here? So here JPA is nothing but Jakarta Persistence API. Previously it was known as Java Persistence API. Okay, so here this JPA is a specification. Okay, it is a set of rules and interfaces that say here is how a Java ORM tool should behave. Okay, so JPA defines which annotations to use, like we have at the rate entity, at the rate table, at the rate ID, at the rate column. Okay, and how to run these queries like JPQL. Okay, so JPQL is nothing but your Java persistence query language. And it also tells us how this entity manager works. Okay, how the transactions should be managed. Okay, so here what you can say that JPA is not code you can run. It is a contract. Okay, so we have different frameworks which can implement it in different ways. Okay. Here you can see that JPA is a specification which has annotations, queries, entity manager, transactions. Okay. So as I told you, like annotations, we have at the rate entity, at the rate table, at the rate ID, at the rate column, and queries like JPQL. Okay. An entity manager, it is used for the persistence operations, and then coming to transactions, which manages the database. Okay. So think this JPA like a restaurant franchise rule book. Okay, so you have a rule book for a franchise. So what it says that it says every franchise must have a menu, a kitchen, and a service counter. Okay, but each individual restaurant. So here your restaurant is nothing but here our Hibernate. Okay, Eclipse link, etc. Okay, so builds their own kitchen. So now coming to JPA versus Hibernate. So here JPA is nothing but our specification, right? And Hibernate is nothing but our implementation. So you know what is JPA, right? Now what is Hibernate? So here Hibernate is the most popular implementation of JPA. Okay, so your Hibernate takes the JPA rulebook and actually builds the kitchen. Okay, so it provides the code that generates SQL from your Java objects. And also it provides the connection pool management. And also it provides caching to avoid hitting the database too often. Okay, it provides a powerful query support through HQL. So here HQL is nothing but Hibernate query language. Okay. So now let's see JPA versus Hibernate. So here we have this JPA and here we have Hibernate. So JPA is a specification. It cannot be run and JPA used for the user interaction. Okay. Whereas Hibernate is an implementation. It can be run and it is used for the internal interaction. Okay. So as I told you that specification, nothing but our rule book. Okay. Implementation, it is our actual tool. Okay. So here you cannot run JPA. Why? Because it is just an interface here. Okay. Whereas in Hibernate you can run. Why? Because here Hibernate does the real work. Okay. And here who uses it? You. Nothing but here annotations in your code. Okay. So here this JPA is nothing but it is a recipe card format which is standard. Okay. And here Hibernate is nothing but this chef. Okay. Who follows that format. Got it? So now let's see how Java code, JPA, Hibernate and database all fit together. Okay. So here you see that we have our Java code, right? And then here we have JPA annotations. And then we have entity manager. And then we have Hibernate. And then JDBC. And then database. Okay. So here JPA annotations is nothing but like I have told you at the rate entity, at the rate ID, at the rate column, right? And here entity manager. It is nothing but it is a JPA interface. So this is your entry point. Okay. And then Hibernate. Hibernate is your actual implementation. Okay. And then JDBC is a low level database connection. And then coming to database, here database like we have H2, MySQL, PostgreSQL, etc. Okay. So here what is happening is when you write the Java objects with JPA annotations, you use Entity Manager to save and find them. Okay. And then this Hibernate translates everything to SQL and sends it to the database. That's it. Okay. So now coming to which Hibernate component should I use for my current task? As we have SessionFactory and Session. Okay. So which Hibernate component we should use? So for that, first understand what is SessionFactory and Session. Okay. So here, what is SessionFactory and Session? When you use Hibernate without Spring, there are two key classes, that is SessionFactory and Session. So here SessionFactory is nothing but it is created once when the application starts. Okay. And it is expensive to create like setting up the entire kitchen, right? And also it holds the database connection pool and all the entity mappings. So think of it as a restaurant itself, built once, open all day, right? And then coming to session. What is this session? Session is nothing but it is created for each unit of work, that is one operation or one transaction. It is a lightweight and short-lived. Think of it as a one chef shift. Okay, so opens, does the work, and then closes. Okay, so this session is used to save, find, update, and delete entities. So here you can see the SessionFactory. It is created once when the application starts, whereas session is created for each unit of work. Here SessionFactory is expensive to create, whereas session is lightweight. And SessionFactory holds the database connection pool and mappings, whereas session is used to save, find, update, and delete entities. Okay. And now coming to key terms to remember. So here it is. What are the things you need to remember? That is ORM. ORM is nothing but our object relational mapping. So it maps Java objects to database tables automatically. And then JPA. JPA is nothing but our Jakarta Persistence API. Previously, it was known as Java Persistence API. So it is a specification, or you can say it is a rule book in simple terms. Okay. So that all ORM tools can follow. And then coming to Hibernate, it is the most popular JPA implementation. Here we have annotation like @entity. It is used to mark a class as a database table. And then we have annotation @ID. This marks the primary key field. And then SessionFactory, it is built once, holds all config and connections. And then coming to session, it is a short-lived used for one unit of work. And then here we have some method like persist method, find method. Okay, all these things I will show you, okay, in an example. So here for now, remember that persist method is used to save a new object to the database. Okay, whereas find method is used to retrieve an object by its primary key. And JPQL, it is an object oriented query language like SQL but for Java objects. Okay, so now let's see an example. So by the end of the session, we will have a recipe entity mapped to a database table. Okay, I'm considering an example of recipe, okay, for your better understanding. So we will have a recipe entity mapped to a database table. We will save a recipe using session.persist method. We will retrieve it back using session.find method. Okay, and we will see the actual SQL Hibernate generates in the console. Okay, so this is the foundation. Everything else in the series is built on. Okay. So here you can see this is our project structure for our Hibernate. Okay, so here I'm considering an example recipe book. Okay, so in this folder we have entity folder where I have this Java file. Okay, recipe.java, and we have a main folder where I have this main Java file, and then we have utility folder that where we have Hibernate util.java file. Okay, and then in resources we have this Hibernate configuration which is in XML format. Okay. So here you can notice that here you have no Spring, no controllers, no repository, right? Here you have just Java classes, a config file, and a main method, right? So now see what's in our pom.xml file. Okay. So here in pom.xml, here you can see that we have only two dependencies. That is here Hibernate core, okay, and then this one H2 database. So here you can see that here we have group ID, that is org.hibernate.orm. Okay, this one, and another dependency is our H2 database. Okay, nothing and no other dependencies. Okay, only two dependencies here. So here this Hibernate code is nothing but the Hibernate ORM library. Okay, and here we have this artifact that is H2, which is nothing but an in-memory database. So we do not need to install MySQL here. Okay. So here you can see that no Spring Boot starter is here, no web framework and here we have a clean and minimal. Okay, and then coming to this our Hibernate, okay, configuration file here. So here this file tells Hibernate that which database to connect to, which username and password to use, and how to behave, like create tables, show SQL or not, okay, and also which entity class to register. Okay, so here you can see that this is our Hibernate configuration, which is public. Okay, here in Hibernate configuration we have the SessionFactory, as I already explained you what is SessionFactory. Okay, so here you can see that we have all these things, database connection, okay, h2 JDBC driver class here, property name you have to give here is a hibernate.connection.driver class, okay, which driver you are using, that is here org.h2.driver. Okay, this is within our property, and here we are closing this property tag. Okay, and then another property, so here we have name, this one we are giving URL, and another property username, and another property that is password, and then here we are closing this property. Okay, this URL, this username we have given here, okay, SA is the username, and then here password is nothing. Okay, and then here you can see that this is our dialect, okay, property. Here we are giving this hibernate.dialect.h2. Here we are using h2 dialect, okay, and then closing this property. Okay, so whenever you are opening a tag you need to close the tag. Okay, and then here we have another, that is whether you want to show the SQL. Here we are providing true. Okay, and then here format, this is for format SQL, here we are providing true. So here what do you mean by the show SQL? It is used to print every SQL statement to the console. Okay, and here what do you mean by this format SQL? So if you provide this true, that means the format the SQL with indentation, so it is easy to read. Okay, and then here we have this hbm2ddl.auto. Okay, so here it is used to create and drop the tables. So here what do you mean by this hbm2ddl dot auto? It means that it controls how Hibernate manages the database schema. Okay, so here we are using this create drop. So what it is used for? So it is used to create tables on startup and drop them on shutdown. And if you here provide here only create, then here this will create table on startup and keep them on shutdown. If you provide here only update, this one, then what it happens, add missing columns and keep existing data. Okay, if you provide here validate, then it will check schema matches, and so it will check schema matches entities, no changes made. And if you provide none, then it means that do nothing, you manage the schema yourself. And then coming to mapping, okay, so here class, this one com.codecraft.recipebook.entity.recipe. So here what do you mean by, so why do you need this? Okay, why? Because here it is used for the entity classes. It registers every @entity class here. Okay, and Hibernate needs to know about them to create tables and map objects. Okay, and then here we are closing our SessionFactory, and then we are closing our Hibernate configuration. Okay, and here you can see that here we have provided db this one db underscore close underscore delay is equal to -1. So here what this means is that it keeps the database alive as long as the JVM is running. And then what is this hibernate.dialect? It is a here it tells that different databases have slightly different. So as you know that different databases have slightly different SQL syntax, right? So telling Hibernate the dialect means it generates the right SQL for our database. Okay. And then coming to Hibernate.show SQL is equal to true. So here what happens is every SQL statement Hibernate generate will print to the console so that you can see exactly what Hibernate does when you call persist method or find method. Okay. So now coming to our this entity folder recipe.java file. Okay. So here you can see that about this our class, here our class name is recipe, public class recipe. Here we have annotated with @entity and table. Okay, so here this at the rate entity is most important. Okay, why? Because it tells Hibernate that map this class to a database table. So without this at the rate entity, Hibernate completely ignores the class. That's why you need this class to annotate it with at the rate entity. Okay. And then coming to this our at the rate table, here we have mentioned name is equal to recipe. So by providing this name, what it happens is it specifies the exact name of the database table. So if you skip this, okay, if you don't provide this name, then Hibernate uses the class name. Okay, here we have class name as recipe, right? So here Hibernate uses this class name as the table name. Okay, and then here we have this field that is private long ID. Here you can see that this field is annotated with at the rate ID and at the rate generated value, where we have provided as strategy is equal to generation type dot identity. Okay. So here, what this at the rate ID means, it means that every entity must have a primary key. So this at the rate ID is used to mark it. Okay. So without at the rate ID, Hibernate will throw an error on startup. And what do you mean by this at the rate generated value? And the strategy is equal to generation type dot identity. So here it is used to tell Hibernate that let the database auto increment the ID. Okay, so here identity means the database generates it, like auto increment in our MySQL, right? And then coming to another field, that's private string name. Here this field is annotated with at the rate column, name is equal to name and nullable equal to false. And same with this string category. Okay, this is annotated with at the rate column, but here only we have provided name is equal to as category. Okay, and here same with this cook time at the red column and this for the vegetarian at the red column. Okay, so here what this at the red column means, it means that map the field to a specific column name. So as here we have provided nullable is equal to false, so this means that it adds a not null constraint to the column. So if the field name matches the column name, then at the red column is optional. Okay, and then here we have no arc constructor. Okay, and here we have constructor with arguments. Okay, so here no arc constructor is nothing but here Hibernate requires a no arc constructor that is empty. Okay, so when Hibernate retrieves a row from the database, it creates an empty object. So using this constructor and then fills in the fields. So without it there will be a runtime error. Okay. So now coming to this our utility folder, that is util folder, that is hibernate util.java. Okay. So here you can see that this is our class, public class hibernate util. Here we have this private static SessionFactory. Okay. And then here we have this noargs constructor. Okay, and this is our static SessionFactory method. Okay, so here why we are using this static SessionFactory? So why? Because SessionFactory is expensive to create, right? It reads the config file, sets up the connection pool, scans all entity classes, and prepares SQL templates. So this can take a few hundreds milliseconds, right? So creating it once and reusing it is the standard pattern. So think of it as opening a restaurant once in the morning and keeping it open all the day, right? So here session on the other hand is cheap, like one order being processed. So you open a new session for each unit of work and close it when done. That's simple, right? So here we have this session factory. This is our method get session factory. If session factory is equal to null, then we have the session factory is equal to new configuration dot configure. Okay, this is the file, our hibernate dot configuration file, right? This one. And then dot build session factory and then return session factory. Okay. And then public static void shutdown. Okay. If session factory is not equal to null and not session factory is closed, then session factory dot close method is invoked and then and here we are printing this statement. Okay. That is session factory closed cleanly. Got it. So now coming to our main folder, that is main.java file here. So here you can see this is our main class. Okay, here we have our main method. Okay, so here we have an example to save a recipe using persist method. So here you can see that recipe1 is equal to new recipe. Here we are creating a new recipe, that is paneer butter masala, and we have given category as main course and cook time 30 minutes, vegetarian, true. Okay, so here what it does is it creates the Java object. So here it is not in the database yet. Okay, and then here we are just giving the print statements that created Java object. Okay, which one? Recipe1, that is this one. Okay, and then ID before saving. Okay, so here recipe1 dot get ID. Okay, and then here we have the session1 is equal to hibernate util dot get session factory dot open session. So what do you mean by this here? So here it means that get the shared session factory and open a new session for this operation. Okay, and then here we have our transaction. Okay, is equal to session1 dot begin transaction. So what do you mean by this? So here it means that to start a database transaction. So here changes are not saved until a commit method is called. So think of it as picking up your pen to write. Okay, so nothing is final yet, right? And then coming to session1.persist, here we are providing this recipe1. So what do you mean by this? So here it tells the Hibernate to save this object. Hibernate will look for at the rate entity annotation, okay, that is which we have provided above our class recipe, right? And to generate and insert into statements. So insert into recipe name, category, and its values, okay. And then it will send it to the database and fill it in the generated ID back into the recipe object, okay. And then transaction1 dot commit. So what do you mean by this? So here it means that finalize the changes. So now the insert is permanent, that is your insert statements, okay, is permanent in the database. And then this session dot close, it means that release the session back to the connection pool. So always you need to close these sessions, okay. And then coming to our demo 2, okay. So to retrieve the recipe by its primary key. So here you have this another session, that is session2 is equal to hibernate util dot get session factory dot open session, okay. We are opening another session, that is session2. And then here we have recipe found is equal to session2 dot find entity class recipe dot class. Here we are providing our class name, that is recipe dot class, okay. And recipe1 dot get ID. And then we are closing this session. After finding it, we are closing this session. So what do you mean by this statement here? So here what we are doing is we are asking Hibernate to find a recipe with this ID, okay. And what Hibernate will do, Hibernate will generate this select statement, okay. So here you can see that if it is found, so if found is not equal to null, then you will get this statement executed, or else this statement will get executed, that is recipe not found, okay. And then here we have another demo to save multiple recipes in one transaction. So here again we are opening a session, okay, that is session3, okay. And then here we are giving this transaction session3 dot begin transaction, okay. So here you can see the session3 dot persist. Here we are persisting new recipes, that is dal tadka, masala chai, and samosa here, okay. And after this we are committing, and then we are closing this session, okay. So here what this means, that this all three persist happen within the same transaction, okay. We no need to create each single we no need to create a transaction for each recipes, okay. Within this transaction we are persisting all these new recipes, okay. So if anyone fails here, all the three are rolled back, okay. And that is the power of the transaction, all or nothing, okay. And then here we have another, right, another demo to try to find a recipe that does not exist, okay. So here the session 4, here we have this hibernate util dot get session factory open session. We are opening the session, Okay, and then here you can see that recipe not found is equal to session4.find. Here same we are providing recipe.class, and here primary key, this one is 999L. So here if this ID does not exist, then find method will return the null. That means it does not throw any exceptions here. Okay, and then we are closing this session. Okay, so here this statement will get executed that recipe with this ID is not found. Okay, and then we are shutting down this Hibernate util. Okay, Hibernate util dot shutdown. So now we will run our application. Okay, so click on this. So now here you can see it got started. So now here you can see that this save a recipe using persist method got executed here. Okay, so here you can see that Hibernate created a table for us. Okay, and then it inserted into our recipes. Okay, and then here this find a recipe using find method, another example, another demo got executed here. Okay, so here for that Hibernate created our select statements. Okay, okay, so to find the recipe using find method. So here you can see that from where. Okay, and then here this is our demo 3. This got executed to save multiple recipes in one transaction. So here Hibernate created multiple insert into statements. Okay, here you can see this one, and this one another recipe, and this is for another recipe. Okay, and here it's got executed that saved 3 more recipes successfully. Okay, and then here you can see that another demo, that is to find a recipe that does not exist, got executed here. So here Hibernate created our select statements. Okay, from and where. So here you can see that recipe with ID 999 is null. Okay, so here you can see that SQL is generated automatically. Okay, here you wrote 0 SQLs, right? So here so here Hibernate did it for us. Okay, and here you can see that the ID is filled automatically after persist method. So here you can see that ID after saving one. So here you got ID. Okay, and here you can see that to find a recipe, you got found recipe with ID 1, name paneer butter masala, category cook time, vegetarian, true. Right. So here this ID is filled in automatically after persist method. Okay. And also we used show underscore SQL is equal to true. Do you remember that? So what that makes is it lets you see exactly what Hibernate is doing. That's why here you are able to see all that things. Okay. So here you got this, and as it saved 3 more recipes. Okay, all these things. And then here you can see that cleaning up connection pools, SessionFactory closed cleanly. Okay. So in Spring Boot, all of this was hidden, right? Why? Because SessionFactory is auto created by Spring Boot. Okay, and session or entity manager is managed per request automatically. And we have used at the rate transactional in Spring Boot, right? So that at the rate transactional handles the begin transaction method and commit method for you. Okay, so now that you know what happens underneath, so Spring Boot magic is no longer magic, right? So you understand exactly what Spring is doing for you, right? So this is for today's session. If you liked my teaching, then do let me know through comment and hit the like button and share it with your circle so that it will be helpful to them. And do not forget to subscribe and hit the bell icon so that you will not miss any of my videos. Till then, keep learning, keep growing. This is Poonam Agrawal from CodeCraft with Poonam signing off.